Today is April 20th, 2016. We're here with Irwin Talbot to talk about his service in the United States Navy in World War II. But first, Irwin, why don't we start? Tell me a little bit about when you were born and where you were born and grew up.
I was born in Manhattan. My family came over from Europe about 4 generations ago. I'm not too happy about the year, but a long time ago.
A long time ago. Sure. All right. So you grew up in Manhattan, went to schools in Manhattan?
Well, yes and no. I was born in Manhattan, and we spent our winters for about 5 years in Lakewood, New Jersey. Okay. I went to school there, grade school there. Then came back to Manhattan for the school years.
Mm-hmm. What year were you born?
Do I have to tell you?
Yeah.
1923.
That makes you 90.
92, but
92.
Don't put that in the papers because people don't know that.
You don't look a day over 91. So
I get taken for a lot less, you'd be surprised. And I feel a lot less, except after this little incident.
No problem. Tell me about how you, how did you end up in the Navy? When did you move out?
When I was 10 years old, my father took me to visit a destroyer, USS Bainbridge, which was anchored in the Hudson. I went aboard the Bainbridge, fell in love, and I announced at the age of 10 that I wanted to be the youngest commanding officer of a ship in the United States Navy. And I put it in writing, and I dated it, and my family had it. Wow. But that's when it began. I really had the feel.
Mm-hmm. So then when did you go in?
I started college in September of 41. Mm-hmm. I was at Lafayette College for a few months, and then Pearl Harbor happened. So I went home, and I told my parents I wanted to join the Navy. And the Navy wouldn't take me because I was too young. I needed parental permission. I was 17. And my mother said, "Oh, you can't do that." And she said, "No, not the Navy," after Pearl Harbor. So my father, who had been in World War I and was a member of the American Legion, said, "Why do you want to do this?" And I said, "I want to serve my country." He said, "That's good enough for me." So he signed me in, and I was signed in New York City, and they said to me, "All right, son, you're in the Navy, and what you're going to do, you're going to go back to Lafayette College and stay there until we want you," because they wanted me to have more education. In 1942, the Navy pulled me out of Lafayette, sent me to Swarthmore, and that's where I went on active duty, was in Swarthmore in 1942. They, at Swarthmore, which was gave me eligibility to apply for midshipman school and so on, they sent me to the Berkeley Carteret in Asbury Park for about 2 months for screening, and then they sent me to Northwestern University. It's a midshipman school. And there I was commissioned, and from there I was an ensign, and they gave me a choice of what do you want? And I said, I want destroyer escort. What's your second choice? Destroyers. What's your third choice? Destroyers. My class was filling in for people who were lost, so it wasn't a big movement in any one direction. They gave it to me, and so I was assigned to destroyer escort the USS SWEARER, which is the actual name. So they pulled me out, and when I was commissioned, I wound up sailing out of San Diego on an aircraft carrier, the USS Kwajalein, and I was taken to Pearl Harbor there, and I was shocked at Pearl Harbor. The damage, I couldn't believe it. Then they put me on another ship, which was to bring me to my base ship. It's funny, we're on this ship, and we're sitting on the fantail, and with two other guys, and says, Jesus, you can get killed here. And we look, and a Japanese submarine had fired a torpedo at us, and it missed.
Wow.
And we were escorted by a big fleet minesweeper, which had depth charges, and as far as we know, she sunk the sub, because there were all the symbols, but you don't know there's water, there's oil, and so on. Got out to the SWEARER, and before I knew it, something happened to my hands, and I had to be taken off the ship. And I was sent from the SWEARER. I was sent to the Dixie, our mothership, for hospitalization, and then I was sent to the USS Barnes, which is another aircraft carrier. And on the Barnes, they assigned 1,200 wounded hospital patients, all Navy or Marines, to ship's crew to get us aboard. And on the Barnes, first time I went through air attack and so on, and they finally sent me to Oakland Hospital, and from Oakland Hospital they sent me to Great Lakes Hospital, and then they sent me to St. Albans Hospital. The idea was to try to get you near home as they could. At St. Albans, they wanted to give me a Navy discharge and a Purple Heart. I said, you take your Purple Heart, you take your Navy discharge, and I'm going back to sea. He said, well, you can't go back to the South Pacific anymore. You can't take the heat. Then I said, send me to the North Atlantic. And the next thing I know, they sent me to Port Newark, where federal shipyards had destroyer escorts, which were there ready for the crew to come aboard. No crew, they were ready to go. And I was a security officer there, and I'm going one night, I'm walking around, and I see some lights on one of these DEs, and I went down there, and there are four guys who are stripping the CIC information. And they went towards me, and I had a .45, and I pulled it, and I said, I'll blow your fucking heads off if you don't get out. And so I turned him in. I get a call. I was on duty for 24 hours and off. I get a call from my commanding officer, you better get your ass in here. So he said, you wrote this down in a log. You wrote everything up. The union is complaining. You're bullying the union. He said, I want you to change that. I said, no, sir. I will not change what I put in the log. He said, you're going to be up the creek. I said, I'm not changing the log. He says, good. And he signed his name below mine saying, approved. And the next thing we know, we're both moved out. Next thing I know, I'm suddenly up in Boston, and they assigned me to a small net tender operating out of Portland, Maine. And there all of a sudden, what happened? Some months later, the flagship of the Atlantic Fleet was coming in, and I was the executive officer of this particular vessel, exec, report to the admiral immediately. Oh my God, what have I done? So I go, and it wasn't the admiral who wanted to see me, it was his aide. His aide was the man who was my commanding officer, where we both got kicked upstairs.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Little did I know that my last shore duty after the war ended, they sent me to Charleston, South Carolina, after they trained me in shore patrol officer work, and we were trained by state troopers, and I was shore patrol officer in Charleston, South Carolina. And from there, I was, after about a year in Charleston, I was put on on what they call it. It wasn't separation, because naval officers, you didn't get separated. I was assigned to standby duty. About 2 or 3 months later, I get a notice, Korean War started. I'm told, be on ready, a 24-hour notice, you're going to be called up. At that time, I got a notice to report for jury duty. And I said, and the judge says, anyone who attempts to get out of this, I'm going to throw in jail. I said, sir, I want to show you this. I said, I'm an officer of the United States Navy on 24-hour call-up. He said, dismissed.
Where were you at the end of World War II?
Well, this is interesting, when World War II ended, my ship had gone to Boston because we were going to go back towards the Pacific anyhow. And word comes in, a British cruiser came in, and she flashes on her lights that the war, Germany had surrendered. So where I was, the only time in my life I've ever been drunk, because I don't like to lose control, I was riding up and down Boylston Street in Boston on a fire engine.
Now, what ship was this? A net tender you were on?
Yeah, it was called the YN. It was YN26. And thereby, if I can jump ahead, the closest I came to being killed in the war, I'd been shot at, I've seen bombs. The closest I came, one night we're in Portland, and I got friendly with the supply officer at Portland Base. So he invited me to his home for dinner that night, and he invited the captain and executive officer of the USS Eagle, which was in Portland. And they had graduated from my midshipman school. They were older, they were ahead of me. So we go and we're having dinner at this man's house, and we took pictures, and we're sitting with our white shirts and blue pants. We looked like anyone else. So they invited me to stay aboard the Eagle that night and go out and swing ship. So, okay.
What kind of ship was the Eagle?
It was an old destroyer, Eagle class. They were very old, but one of the kinds that they needed. I sleep in the engineering officer's cabin. We're starting to sail at 8 in the morning, and a message comes out, canceled, report back to your ship immediately. You have been transferred to YN41 as officer in charge. So as they're leaving, I go back to my ship. Go back to the ship. The Eagle sails. And as we're looking at her, as she passed, and we waved to her, April 23rd, she blew up and went down with only 11 survivors right before our eyes. She hit a mine. Well, one of the things that I'll never forget, and it's almost the day I was reborn, the officer who relieved me so I could move over had come from the South Pacific with 30 days leave and 4 days travel time. He counted wrong. He came a day early, and I'm here.
Wow. Wow. Saved your life. That's amazing.
About 45, 50 years later, the Navy had always said that the boilers blew on the Eagle, and we knew it didn't. Finally, they admitted that a German submarine laying mines had blown up.
And this is right outside Portland Harbor or Boston?
Off Portland Harbor. What happened is there was a story came out, the Navy finally admitted it. And I got a call from Seattle newspaper, would I come out and do a story, because I was one of the few living people that knew what happened. Well, I was booked to go to Seattle, and so help me, this is the truth. That's when the planes hit the towers.
Oh, wow. In 2001. Wow. Yeah.
So I have considered myself on borrowed time and make the best of it.
What did you like most about your Navy service during World War II?
I was deeply touched by the feeling that we were really cared about each other. I respected it. I was thankful for it. One of the things I was thankful for, I may be jumping around, the night before I left San Diego, I was at the Mark Hopkins Hotel for a few days with 3 brother officers who had, and we had a party, and we had a cocktail party at the Mark Hopkins. And we made a promise that after the war, we'd get together for a drink. I was the only one that lived.
Wow.
That's true.
Yeah. That's... Anything you didn't like about being in?
Oh, I tell you, I got my ass kicked quite a bit. It wasn't very easy, and I'll lay it on a line, is to get to where I got, there was a lot of discrimination. And to be blunt, I'm Jewish, and they didn't want smart-ass Jews from New York. That's the way they put it. But I don't let things stop me. I spoke to the dean at Lafayette, and I asked him to help me. He said, I'll get you in if you play it my way. He said, I will be your sponsor. The president of school will be your sponsor, and now we need your minister. Who's your minister? I said, I don't know, I'll ask my father. He said, no, that's not who your minister is. I said, isn't? No, it's Dr. Plummer from the First Presbyterian Church in Easton. That's where the college was. He's a religion professor, and he's backing you. He said, next thing, where do you live? I said, live in Manhattan. He said, no, you don't. I said, don't? No, you're just a small town boy in Pennsylvania. You live in Easton, Pennsylvania, on Paxton Oaks Avenue. Took my college address. And they wouldn't take New Yorkers. They put me through Philadelphia, and that's how I got in. I'll never forget, you don't let discrimination stop you. Don't let anything stop you. And that's it. And those were things. I played, they sent me to Swarthmore. I played football there. The coach rode my tail all the time. He called me the worst football player he'd ever seen in his life, and he played me because he wanted to laugh at me. But I had to get over him, and no one's going to stop me. And that's been my philosophy in life. If you set up to do something, you do it, and you don't look for excuses. But there's nothing about the Navy I disliked.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So,
and that's to this day.
did you when Korea broke out and you had 24-hour notice? Did they call you up?
No, they didn't. And the reason they didn't, I was actually ready to go. The reason they didn't, at the time, they had kind of a point system as to who got it. Because at the end of the war, people just didn't get out. You had to have been there, your age and your service. And so under the point system, they weren't going to call me unless they really were desperate. So they didn't call me. However, you don't get, when you're a naval officer, you don't get separated. What you do is you might be on inactive duty, but I was in 12 years before I got my discharge. And during that time, I went back on active duty a few times. At the Navy, for example, was sending a formal visit to Canadian ports on a big destroyer, the Eberly. They needed a navigator, and the Navy asked me if I'd go on active duty and take that role.
And how long would that be?
It was 2 weeks.
Oh, 2 weeks. Okay.
And it's interesting because assembling, we had a lot of young recruits and some seasoned officers, so we're assembling on the dock, again in Port Newark, and the captain gets all the officers together. He said, listen, I don't want to know your rank. I just want to know, what can you do? So the executive officer said, you know Admiral Fielding? Of course I know Admiral Fielding. He's a commandant at Newport. Yes. Well, Admiral Fielding said, this is the best young officer he's ever come across.
That's great. Yeah. Any other time you go back to active duty?
Yeah, once it was interesting. I ran into a friend. He said, hey, you want to go on active duty on the Missouri? We're going to go out and fire the big guns. Sure. So they put me on active duty and so on. Aside from that, I was assigned to the 105th Division up in Yonkers, which was a Navy Reserve Division. I was on that for years.
Okay. Now, when did you get a commendation from the Army? Was that later?
That was later. You'll see it refers to Dr. Irwin Talbot. That's my professional thing. At St. Peter, we had a terrific Army unit, which when they graduated with regular Army commissions, not reserve commission, nothing. But they had a large staff, and I was made the liaison between the college and the military. So much to the point that I became their commissioning officer and so on, and their liaison. I got told one day, Dr. Talbot, you have to go to such and such place at 10 o'clock this morning. I said, I've got a class. No, you got to cancel it. There's somebody coming up. I go, and what came up was someone came up from Washington to present me with this. And it says, Dr. Irwin Talbot, a naval officer for service to the Army.
Yeah, that's great.
I don't think many people have that.
Yeah, no. So your career, after you got out of the Navy, I know you had a business career and then went into teaching, or is it the other way around?
Oh, no. In my family, for generations, you did as you were told. And I was told that I was going into business. I wanted to make a career in the Navy. I was ready to stay. No, you're going into business. You're going into the real estate business. I don't want to go into the real estate business. Well, that's where you're going. So I went into real estate business, and I bought my first building by giving someone $500 for his deed to walk away from a property and give it to me. So I started a real estate business as a broker in New York, and then also moved into New Jersey. I can bore you with Navy stories because I had this business going in New Jersey, and the town in Teaneck, and the town came along and condemned my building under eminent domain because they wanted to put a school there, and I had to get out. So a man comes down, I didn't know, he says, I want to talk to you. You sold 3 properties in a row next to mine. I'd like you to meet my nephew. And I said, who's your nephew and why would I want to meet him? So he said, my nephew's building. I said, I don't want a job. He said, what do you got to lose? Go talk to him. So I met this fellow who was then building 5,000 homes a year, later more. So I met him, his name was Kendall, and he said, Irwin, I'll tell you what, I'm going to form a separate real estate company. You're going to be the president. You're also going to be vice president of marketing, and whatever you made last year, I'll give you more. So I said, Mr. Kendall, we've been talking for 20 minutes, and you make me this offer. He says, don't you recognize me? I said, Mr. Kendall, are you Herbie Katz? He said, yes. He had the next room to me in midshipman school. You're on. And I took it, but it's interesting.
So how long were you in the real estate business?
Well, I was in the real estate business until about, I'd say about 57 or so, and that evolved into mortgage banking, okay. And I became eventually vice president of a mortgage banking institution. And by this time, I had met and married Leta. She was much too young in the days that I speak of, and we've married 52 years now. But anyhow, she said, if you could be anything in the world that you want to be, what would you do? I said, I'd chuck it all and go back and finish my education. I had a bachelor's degree from Lafayette, a bachelor's degree from Swarthmore. She said, so go do it. So I went to NYU and got my master's in public affairs, and one of the faculty said to me, Irwin, you should be teaching. I said, give me one reason. I'll give you 2. You will forever be young, and you will be forever having fun. I want you to know, after being out of college all those years, in a year and a half, I got my master's, and a year and a half later, NYU gave you 9 years to get your degree. I got.
So how many years did you teach?
I taught from about 1978 till about 06. And I'm Professor Emeritus now, and I'm still active.
From St. Peter's College?
University, yes.
St. Peter's University, sorry. Looking back on it, how did your Navy service influence everything you've done in life since then?
I didn't come from a family that had difficulties during the Depression, put it that way. And I went to the finest prep schools and so on. And I used to get an allowance that a family could live off. And I go in the service, for the first time in my life, nobody can do it for me. I have to do it myself. And one of the best lessons I learned, when I got to midshipman school, there were 4 of us in the room. One was this fellow I spoke about, and the other 2, one was from Mississippi, and the other was from Texas. They were deep south. You couldn't understand them half the time. One became all-pro blocking back in the NFL. The other had a similar career. These guys who were stupid looking, they were bright as could be, and they could do the academics. On the other hand, I had never been tested, and here I learned something. I could compete with them physically just as they could compete with me intellectually. That was a great lesson.
It really is. Well, with that, I'd like to thank you for the interview, and thank you very much for your service with the United States Navy and serving our country.
Thank you.